All right, it is the Gateway API meeting for April 25th. We've got lots going on this week, and I think I've monopolized the agenda today, as is often the case, but especially today. So if anyone, as always, if anyone wants to add things to the agenda, please do. And for anyone who either is new to this meeting or hasn't been here for a while, this is a very informal meeting. Feel free to ask questions at any point. Some of us may have more context than others. We've been working on this API for a very long time now, and very, very appreciative of questions and comments and feedback. And also at any point, feel free to add things to the agenda in this doc. I think everyone should have added access to it. So with that, let me go ahead and jump into the first thing on the agenda, which is a big PR that has gone back and forth. I don't know how many times now, but I finally got some time to come back to it last week and made some big changes. So it's probably easiest just to go right to the deploy preview and look at everything. Bowie, one of his comments was, this could really use some diagrams. I think I may have gone overboard with diagrams, or I may have made those diagrams too complicated. So yeah, that's a thing. So first I created this kind of flow chart that describes, okay, everything starts in V1 alpha. Is that working well? Yes or no. If it is, continue to beta. And if not, it either gets removed or we try again with a new alpha API version. And similar with beta, if there are additional changes, go again, try another beta. If not, we're good to go to V1. That's like a very, very high level idea of what I'm trying to describe. Like everything here, if I tried to represent every little detail, this would be not a flow chart. It would be very complicated. This may gloss over too much, or it may include too much information. I don't know, but I just wanted to highlight these are some diagrams. And if they seem wrong or if they seem confusing, this would be a good time to mention it. And a very related diagram for these release channels, basically trying to explain, hey, experimental channel is just a superset of everything inside stable channel. So one of the things I mentioned in Slack last week is I spent a lot of time as I was reworking this, trying to describe how the combination of experimental and, or no, sorry, of stable channel and alpha resources made sense, right? So like I've got a TCP route, it's in the stable channel, but it's only alpha. What does that mean? It felt very confusing. So the change that I'm proposing here is that we just say stable channel just includes resources that have made it to beta, and experimental channel includes everything else. So anything that's an alpha or beta resources plus experimental fields on those resources. That's it, right? So experimental is everything. Stable is just the things that have made it to beta or GA. That seems at least slightly easier to describe than the alternative that I spent far too long trying to. So again, hopefully that makes sense. I'm seeing some nods, so hopefully that's the right track.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I was always a little bit uncomfortable about having alpha resources in the stable channel. That seemed weird to me too. So yeah, I think that's a very elegant solution. It's nice.
Cool. That's good. Yeah, sometimes it just helps. It's helpful to just try and explain it more. And the more I tried to explain it, it didn't make sense. So that's why, yeah. Okay, so this is basically the same flow chart, just a little bit simpler, that new fields always start in experimental. If they meet criteria, they can graduate to stable. If not, they can either be removed or modified with another update to experimental channel and back to the same cycle all over again. Hopefully these flowcharts make sense. I don't know. If anyone has better ways to describe this flow, I'm very, very open. but yeah, hopefully they're better than nothing, or maybe there's better approaches too. Any thoughts on these updates as a whole?
I'm +1. I think, yeah. I think that having the flowcharts is necessary. I think your flowcharts are always like, yeah, they can be intimidating when you first go there, but it actually does make it easier, because we do have a very complex, I think is a better way to say it, versioning story. So the more we can make it easy for people to understand, the better.
Yeah, agreed. Okay, cool. I'll run with that then. That was easy. Okay, this is another one that turned into, so basically all these things are running through feedback that we've gotten so far on the API review, and specifically Tim's comments. And one of his comments was, hey, instead of trying to do that type value thing, we do a lot of, type prefix match value, whatever matches that type. We should really have different fields. And, we're not going to go ahead and retroactively change things that have already made it into the API and are used. But in the case of this example of path modifier for rewrites and redirects, this is a net new thing in 050, and we should probably use that idea. So this refactors a lot of that and adds a union discriminator. So this started as a thread on Kubernetes API reviews. I linked it in the agenda somewhere, but it's also here. I didn't even know this was a mailing list, but it is, and it got good discussion from a bunch of different people. I'm not going to highlight the whole thread, but there was a bunch. The high level is, at least of the participants on this thread, everyone believed strongly that we should move away from generic value fields and to per type fields. So in this case, the rename is, instead of a single value, there it goes from that to a replace full path field and a replace prefix match field. For those of you who are familiar with our filters API, this is basically the same thing we're doing for filters, just in one more place. That's it. The thing that was a little more controversial was this type field. And it's especially bad because we're inside filters where we already have the union discriminator. So you have a union discriminator here, and you have one here. And if you look at this, you could say, why do you need the type field? You can just clearly see this, and this feels kind of unnecessary. That's what a lot of that conversation in the thread was about. My motivation for adding it here is, one, it's consistent with what we already have in filters. And two, since there's still some ambiguity of whether or not this is a good idea, it's much easier to have the field and transition it to optional in the future if we say, well, this isn't really necessary, than to retroactively add it later. We just can't, right? One of the most compelling arguments I've seen for a union discriminator at this point is when you have version skew, which I think we're going to have a lot in our API, where you have 4 different implementations of this API. They all support slightly different versions of Gateway API. And one of the older implementations doesn't recognize this new type. We have a new substitute type in our URL rewrite, or new filter type, whatever. So if we didn't have a type field, what that would look like to them is just an empty struct, right? They wouldn't have any idea. They just see there's an empty struct. What am I supposed to do with this? Whereas instead they can see, hey, this is a type I don't recognize, and they can just say, I don't support type foo for path or for whatever, which feels like a better UX. As much as this is a little clunky, it does allow implementations to provide clearer feedback. So that's a long way of saying why I'm proposing this specific change. I've talked a lot about this one. Any thoughts, feedback, preference, union discriminators?
I think what you said makes sense to me. Yeah, I think the version skew thing is really important. It's actually the reason why I am generally a -1 on the Cube Builder enum validation, because that does not play well with version skew, and also it doesn't allow implementations to do their own, to add in like domain prefix their own things. Enum means that the set is closed over additions without API bump. So unless you, I mean, the API guidelines say like, hey, enum implies that this is all the possible values. If it's not going to be all the possible values, you need to kind of make it extremely clear that your thing needs to handle stuff that's not in that there needs to be a default case that's not panic. And so yeah, I think a lot of these things, like where we have a type, it would be really useful almost always where we have a type field like this. It should be, we provide the constants for the ones that are supported in the API, that have some level of support in the API, and then we allow domain prefix string so that we can add, project contour.io / some special type, right? Like, or so, so implementations can add their own things if need be. That's kind of implying that, hey, we want to be able to have implementations extend these things. Maybe for the path rewrite types, we don't want that, but that's why I'm generally -1 on the enums. So yeah, I think the idea of the union discriminators is good, but we just need to be really careful, as you say, that we handle what happens when your controller expects a different version of the Gateway API gracefully as possible.
Yeah, that's a good point, and brings up a whole other thing of how we support extended types, where those values would live if they existed. But having a type field, having a union discriminator here does leave room for that, which I think is a net positive.
Agreed.
Okay.
But yeah, for that to work, you have to take out the enums.
Yep. Okay, I will leave this open for review and additional discussion, but it seems like we're okay with it. Anyone not like union discriminators or would rather us avoid that extra verbosity here? Cool. Okay, I will leave this one as is.
One thing I'm not sure about though, Rob, that I just should ask now is, so this union discriminator is enforced by the API. So is it like by the API server?
No, there's like a cap about how to, but not yet. It is a sufficiently widely used pattern that it could be in the future, but what I've done so far is just more webhook validation. So
that's fine.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, if we get to, like, the ideal situation that we have is that we have some validation in the webhook that we then get to remove because the API server has built in.
Yeah, we are following an upstream pattern, so it seems likely this will be in the future something that can be represented with an annotation. So hopefully,
yeah, cool.
Okay. Well, this was all right. Yeah, one more controversial one to get us going today. So one of the other comments from Tim, several comments from Tim related to this gap. Sorry, I get my letters right, which is the address matching that I was a champion of, and I really wanted to see this work. And as I've tried to explain it to Tim in API review, I've had a hard time making it make sense. So there are a few things that So basically, this is just something that we added to TCP and UDP route. It allows matching requests based on source or destination IP address. The question around source IP matching is this just a firewall? And if it's not a firewall, is that dangerous to have source IP matching that does not behave like a firewall when some might expect it to? I've chatted a bit with Shane, but he's been out of office, so I only got a brief discussion with him about this. The perspective from him, and I hope is that I don't think he was tied to either of these, but especially not source address matching. I think source address matching is one of the hardest things one of the riskiest things, because it could imply more than it is, and two, the use case may not be entirely clear. The other one, for destination address matching, I think it makes a lot of sense for things like egress, for things that are less well defined in the API today. But because it's so poorly defined, I'm hesitant to introduce it to the API right now. So I've been going back and forth on this, and I hope someone feels more strongly than I do on this, but I just have not been in a place where I can provide a strong enough argument to keep it into this to this release of the API. And so my thought would be to just put a pause on this, say we'll come back to it in the next release, but it's not quite clearly understood, or we have big enough questions that can't be answered right now, and we don't have anyone that's just really needs this tomorrow. So my preference right now, I think, is to remove this from the API for now and change the status of this gap to implementable or provisional or something like that. I'm not sure what the correct status is. I don't know. That's a lot. It would be the first time we had implemented a gap and then said, well, actually, we're not sure about it. So it is significant in that sense. I think that is why we have this kind of second layer of review of, it made sense to us at the time, but now that we're looking at it again, I'm not sure. This is just being added as an experimental field. So you could say, well, it's just experimental, we can remove it later. But I do want our experimental bar to still be relatively high. I want experimental to still be something that people use. And if we just throw everything in there and, 50% of things that make it to experimental get removed, not many people will actually use it. So that's a lot of thoughts about this gap. I can try and formalize those thoughts in a comment somewhere. I'm not sure where, because this is API review. But yeah, any other thoughts? Anyone argue in favor of keeping or removing this?
I thought we did discuss a little bit about the source stuff when we did it, but yeah, I don't remember enough about the detail. It seems likely that we were like, yeah, okay, seems reasonable, and then that was it. So it does make sense to me that yeah, we should sort of hold this a little bit more. It does feel weird to sort of back out something that's implemented already, but being able to admit you're wrong is pretty good. So yeah, I think it feels to me like I don't disagree with anything you're saying. It feels to me like the right thing to do here is to log a blocking issue for 050, ping Shane on there because I mean, it's his change, like we need to talk to him about it before we do anything. And then put all the stuff you've said on that issue, so that then we have a place to talk about this and we have some notes of that. And that way we can refer to we can say, hey, yeah, we're going to decide what we do about this in the issue. you can say I personally in favor of taking it out. I probably tend to lean, yeah, it makes more sense to take it out, and we do want to keep that quality bar high for experimental. That makes sense. But yeah, we need to understand where this is at, because I think that Shane wanted this implemented because he needed it for their controller. So their controller probably has implemented it already.
I don't really see that. Destination address is a harder one for me to think of use cases for, but source addresses, I can think of a fair number of use cases kind of off the top of my head for that. I might argue for it not being a core, but an extended feature. But I don't think, since we've already got it in, I don't think it makes sense to pull it out. Certainly not the source address. Like I said, again, destination address, I'm less clear on the use cases for.
Yeah, so I think, actually, John, I think you were going to say something.
Yeah, just from our point of view, like a firewall point of view, if you're doing this sort of filtering at the gateway, and by the time it gets through to a service and then gets to the pod, the source address is gone, typically. So you're filtering at the gateway, and then you're seeing something at the pod. It may, I mean, it's different. I'm sort of struggling to articulate this well, because thinking it through in my head as I'm rambling. I just pointed out the destination on egress makes sense, because that's what you set to where it's going, so that doesn't change. But the source address coming in, what it hits the load balancer as, and then what it hits a pod as is two different things. So it has been munged in the way in. I'm not quite sure if we're doing anybody a favor or helping them by acting like a firewall at the gateway or redirector. I'm not sure.
I think I would argue with you a bit in this, in that there's multiple ways to actually indicate the source IP address. There's a couple of different protocols out there that will piggyback it into some additional information. And there's many cases going through things like firewalls or load balancers doesn't change the source address. There's a technique often used with load balancers called direct server return, where the incoming traffic goes through the load balancer, but the actual response goes directly from the services out. So I don't think that, I just wouldn't agree with you. I think there's plenty of scenarios where the source address is still valid, if you will, by the time it hits the gateway.
I agree with you, Jeff, but I think it's more, yes, there are cases, but not all cases. So yeah, using your HTTP headers to get source address, yep, works great. Direct service return, breaks firewalls because you don't get the client and server path. So, but still works for lots of use cases. So don't disagree, but I was just adding more if then else but type logic, which is I always worry about.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think one of the things that concerns here for source address matching specifically was the behavior is not clear. Is it matching, or is it like, so if this request doesn't match this set of IPs or this IP, what do we do? Do we drop the connection? Do we just let something else match it further down the line? The syntax there is different and has significant impact, and we have not defined it here well, I would say. And I think, you know, the other side of it is, where does this belong, right? Is this really and that's related to that, is this really a routing construct of just, this is a way you match requests? Or is this fundamentally a firewall concept of, I only want to allow requests from these trusted ranges? And if so, should that be on the gateway and not on a, like, you know, how do intersections work here? Is that, you know, if you have two routes attached to the same gateways and both specify a different set of source, you know, I think there's more nuance here that hasn't been well defined. And I don't feel equipped to answer those questions properly.
When we say route, would I route some traffic to one TCP route and other traffic to a different TCP route? Or what would I route? I mean, if it's TCP, it goes to TCP route, and it's.
I feel like it's like, I think the problem that it feels to me like the problem you're saying, Rob, is just that it's underspec, right? Like that we haven't said, like, you know, what does this address match mean for the different route types? You know, like, what does the address match mean for TCP route types? What does it mean for UDP route types? What does it mean for HTTP route types? You're like that. And we're going to have to be specific about that, because it can mean slightly different things, right? Like for HTTP routes, having an address match kind of means, like, you implies you should only match, the match criteria for the HTTP route should include the IP addresses, like the source IP, the client IP in this case for HTTP route. For TCP route, it does kind of more imply a firewall-like behavior, where it's like, well, if you don't, does that mean that you don't have, that if traffic doesn't match, the source for the traffic to be valid, to be sent off to the TCP target? So the TCP route, John, to kind of answer your question a little bit, in my mind, is like it's kind of like a way of describing like firewall rules, like to some extent, but it's a way of describing, it hits the thing where load balancers often overlap with firewalls, like that. Like especially layer 4 load balancers, they often overlap functionality with firewalls. Well, they will drop traffic that doesn't match. If you have a set of listener that has a bunch of addresses on there, it's kind of expected that it will drop traffic that doesn't match anything there, and that traffic will be reset in the same way that a firewall would. You'll be just like, no, this port's not open. That feels to me like the expectation, but I agree that it's not really well spec'd out enough to say that is the expectation, right? Like, that's what I would expect using this functionality in a layer 4 load balancer, but is that what everyone's going to expect? And we haven't spec'd it out to say this is what you must do. Does that make sense, John?
Yeah. I'm just trying to think of, if I have two TCP routes, would I want to filter them by IP address, like, send some traffic to this route and other traffic to that route? What would the use case be?
Yeah.
I'm sure we think of one, but is it?
Seems weird. It seems like this is going to be more about the source one. It's going to probably be more about firewall-like functionality than routing based on source IP.
Right, and if it is about firewall, which is what it feels like, should it belong on the gateway itself? Like right now, what we've added is specific to TCP and UDP route. There is no such concept for HTTP. And it feels like this is something that is really, it almost feels like it belongs on the gateway if it belongs somewhere. If we're talking about pure firewall behavior, trying to implement merging logic of this route says this route says this other thing. Do we AND those together? Do we OR those? I get probably OR, but it feels messy and maybe not. All of this is me trying to say this feels like we did not spec this as thoroughly as Like now that I'm trying to answer more in-depth questions about it, I'm realizing, oh, I really don't know.
And that is not a good thing for a spec, right? Like you shouldn't look at the spec and have people be like, and have had the people who wrote the spec be like, oh yeah, I don't know how this works. Like that's bad.
Yeah. So that would be, that's kind of what's leading me to my perspective of, this is not necessarily a bad idea. It may just be something that is not quite ready to be released yet.
Yeah. Mikhail raises a good question about like, what about the personas? Who's going to be the ones owning if they are firewall rules, who owns the firewall rules? Would they need to be configured by the same people who create routes? That is a very good question. That is 100% not answered.
I've always assumed that firewall rules are a level above, like they're at that gateway, they're at that infra layer. I could be wrong on that, but that's a really good question.
There's scenarios where I've certainly seen where, example, for a specific service, if it's coming from one of the corporate official addresses, my company's owned addresses, I send it one place, and if it's not, I send it a different one. And firewalls don't really handle that kind of scenario. That's where something like the gateway comes in to make those forwarding decisions. And so that could vary by listener. And it could even be some specific endpoints with, say, HTTP that would be permitted or not. So, but that's not to say that the points about it being under spec, that's certainly valid. If we feel it's under spec, then we should not go forward with it.
Yeah, I think that's the problem here. It's not that we disagree that there's usefulness to it. It's that we haven't spec'd out the usefulness enough to make it like implementable without future problems. And that's the thing that I'm worried about here, is that if we leave this in there, people are going to implement it. People are going to do stuff with it and make assumptions, and then we're stuck with those assumptions. We're back in the Ingress v1 beta 1 problem where, it depends on what the biggest implementation says is what we end up doing, or the one that gets in first or something like that. And I'd rather have this spec be a spec that we define things. So yeah, sorry, go John.
No, I was thinking that routing is inherently, you give it a single address with a mask, and to say this is the route you want to have. Whereas firewalls, as what Rob was mentioning, is ands and ors, which I'm not sure we want to implement ands and ors and more complex things. It's a slippery slope. It says, oh, here's a firewall rule, and somebody says, oh, but I need an and I need an or, and then your implementation becomes challenging.
Yeah. I think, I feel, Rob, to be honest, off the top of my head now, after this conversation, I feel like it actually feels like it would be much better to put, if we want to do address matching, you put it on the gateway, like you said. That makes far more sense to me, because then if you have the address match at the listener level, then it can have, then by implication, it has different semantics based on the route type that's attached to the listener, right? That means if you have address matching on the listener somehow, then that means that it implies that if you're doing a HTTP route, you're going to use whatever mechanism you can to recover the client IP. Maybe that's exported for maybe HA proxy protocol or some other thing, right? But the point there is that the intent is very clear, that this listener, it requires you to be on these things, and then if you have another listener that doesn't, then that you kind of doing a firewall, but you've got a catch all at the bottom. If you don't, then there's no match, and so it's pretty clear there's no match, right? And you don't have to worry about merging behavior, because listeners, in that case, those having address matches means the listeners can't be merged, and that's and then your list can also is in one place, so you don't have to worry about merging multiple lists. That off the top of my head, that makes actually a lot more sense, and it immediately makes the spec much clearer. Whereas if you have the current thing has the problem, as Rob says, that if you have like 10 TCP routes that all have different address match things in there, and they're all supposed to go onto one listener, how do you coalesce that rule set, as John says, into a single rule set that makes sense? You know, like how does that interaction work? Most of the time, the thing that you're going to be programming is going to want, it's going to need to do that sort of the address matching at some reasonably sort of lower level than that. Yeah, so it seems weird, and it seems like it could be very difficult to implement, as John says. So yeah, I'm definitely a +1 for taking this out for now and looking at bringing it back to bringing it up to the listener rather than doing this. But yeah, we need to talk to Shane about it, because if he's already implemented this, then that's going to break him.
Yeah, no, I talked with him briefly. I don't think they've implemented it yet,
Okay.
but I'll follow up when he's back in office to be sure. I agree. Next step is an issue. Discuss this. Discuss our hesitation with the current state, and see what kind of feedback we get from there. Again, like everyone is saying, this is a good concept, but maybe not in the right place yet. And that's why it helps to have these extra layers of review, and why it helps to try and, I spent too long trying to explain and justify this, and I couldn't make it make sense to myself. And so, yeah, anyways, cool. All right, so this is, I'll take that action item. I can create an issue out of this. And while we're here, I think we talked a lot about source address matching, destination address matching. The use case that I was thinking of and most familiar with was really for egress, right? For the other side of this, which I think is a fairly unimplemented, less understood concept that could be used for this API, right? Of I want to adjust, intercept requests headed here and do this to them, kind of thing. It's an interesting concept, but it is not well defined right now. And so, again, I think maybe that's just under spec, but still at least plausible. And I should also say it is still destination address matching is still potentially useful for traffic coming through a gateway. It just means that gateway must be listening on a lot of addresses, or I don't know how else you interpret that. Yeah. Was there anyone else who's been interested in destination address matching or thought about it in any way, or is most of the interest here about source address matching? I'll take that as just me. Okay, well, I'll follow up on that conversation then. Cool. All right, one that's I think less controversial now. Thank you for the good discussion here. This is one request to add one more cherry pick to the O.4 release. I think Steve had mentioned this. Someone else had actually fixed this, thank you, on our main branch, and then never cherry picked it back. So anyone who's deploying a version of the webhook with our latest released version still has this bug. So it's a simple cherry pick that makes us use the updated version of Kube Webhook Search Gen. I think this PR in and of itself is not controversial. What I would like to do out of this PR is actually cut a release. I'd like to cut a 0.4.3 based on this. There's a few, I think, entirely webhook related improvements that we haven't released yet. It seems like it would be good. It also would finally test out our full end-to-end image tagging now that we've seen it work once. Yeah, so if everyone is okay, I'd like to plan on that this week. That means I need someone to review this, and then I can come up with a change log, and I'll need reviewers on that also this week. Does that seem like a reasonable timeline? Okay, cool. That was easy. All right, we are moving through these. V1 beta 1 milestone. There's a few webhook things left. I thought we already did. Oh, Nick, this is making installation easier, right? Because we already have something saying that it's required, I think.
I think actually,
yeah,
your PR, the one that will actually close that.
I keep on forgetting that's not merged. It feels like forever ago to me. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yeah.
Your PR, that PR will merge that one.
Mike, I don't think Mike is on this call. I think there's just one tiny bit left of this one, and maybe the bit that's left doesn't need to be part of the V1 beta 1. I think we got the most important things out of this one. Let me leave that one open. PR that will close this. This one I'm going to save documentation until my actual change comes in, because everything about this is, the API structure is changing with redirects and rewrites. Yeah. This is a follow-up to the PR I already have. Meha has handled this one. Okay, this didn't actually go anywhere. I thought, okay, so Mike had a number of issues that really define this. I think, Nick, while you were out, and one of them made it into the milestone. Yes, the one quadruple 1111 issue is the one that we added to the issue, and it was really suggesting that, hey, we've got these kind of inconsistent conditions and reasons in status across different resources, and where possible we should try and use the same terminology. I think this was really well defined. Thank you to Mike for this one. I think we just need someone. I can chat with Meha to see if she's able to work on this, or if not, or go ahead, Nick.
I'll try and catch up with her on
that one. Okay, great. Okay, so this one probably has someone to work on it, which would be great. Something to fix this one is already in. This is a really tiny PR. If anyone has a chance to review it, it just removes some confusing lines from Go Docs. I need to have, or anyone needs to have a PR for this. V1 Alpha 1 deprecation. I should have done this a while. We should have done this a while ago, but I think it's just, this will be deprecated soon, probably with the V05.0 release. And I don't know that there's much else to say. I thought about just adding a header to all of our V1 Alpha 1 docs pages that says this is being deprecated. Please migrate to V1 Alpha 2. And I think that's all we need. Cool. Okay. It looks like I've assigned myself to this one, but if anyone else wants to volunteer, by all means. It looks like I've taken a while to get to this one. All right, we're almost through these. This is the issue I just went to with Mike and status. I have already, this is just a PR, and this is a PR. Okay. I think that's everything in V1 Beta 1. We are making progress, slowly but surely. Any other things that we should add to V1 Beta 1, or does that feel like a complete list? Actually, just kidding, that issue I need to create should go in this milestone.
Absolutely, that's probably one of the biggest blockers. But
Okay.
aside from that, that sounds reasonable to me. I will be able to tell you more once I've caught up on notifications and stuff.
Yeah, cool. Okay, and with that, let's move over to issue triage. I don't think we have a whole lot of activity over the past week. This one is going to be fixed by my PR. That's just, again, because we hadn't cherry picked back the webhook search engine fix. And this one, I think we just need help triaging this. I'm not sure. And I think there's already an issue that covers most of these. I can spend, it looks like Harry has already done some time reading through this, but I don't know if anyone has some time, it can help triage and understand what the request is. That would be good. 1074. Okay.
Yeah,
And I
I'll
think-
hit that one when I do my, I'm going to do a sweep through all my Gateway API repo notifications. So I'll hit that one when I do that.
Cool. Great. And I think that's all that's happened in the past week. So yeah, let me know. Did I miss anything? Any last things we should cover or get our time back? All right. Well, cool. Thanks, everyone. We'll talk to you next week and have a good one. See you.